right, our big story is where we start right now. Israel is expected to attack Hamas from the air, land, and the sea as the humanitarian crisis is growing there in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians evacuating to the south as the death toll from this conflict rises by the hour. Israeli Health Ministry says that more than 1,400 people killed in Israel. While you look in Gaza, the Palestinian Health Authority there said that the number of dead is climbing beyond 2,700. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now inviting President Biden to visit the country. So joining us right now is the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Djerejian. Thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate your time. And as we talk about this invitation that Netanyahu has extended to President Biden, there was one senior official that told our Martha Raddatz that if Biden were to accept this invitation, essentially it would be to try to modulate decision-making within the Israeli cabinet. So what do you make of that? Is that essentially to sort of soften the hardliners, you think?
That might be it, because as you know, the Israeli, before the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, for months preceding, Israel has been in an incredible historic internal turmoil over the reforms of the Constitution by Bibi Netanyahu's very right-wing religious Zionist coalition. And therefore, the Israeli body politic is torn apart. And I think this is one of the reasons that Hamas decided to attack at this time, one of many, because it perceived that there was disarray in Israel, and this might be a moment of opportunity. I'm not clear on the invitation from Prime Minister Netanyahu to President Biden to visit Israel. I think the United States' posture of defending Israel and supporting Israel at this time of troubles by what you mentioned in your commentary, the two carrier task forces that are headed there and are there as a warning to Iran, is a powerful signal in itself. Plus, Secretary Blinken has been in the region, and the president himself has voiced very strong support for Israel. But this is this attack by Hamas is also a time to the politics of the Israeli government, the continued settlement activity, issues on the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and importantly, the tendency in the region to minimize the Palestinian issue and to focus on normalization agreements between Arab states and Israel by subjugating the Palestinian issue to a subjunctive or subordinate tense. There are many reasons why Hamas has moved now, but the important thing, again, as you mentioned in your commentary, the Israeli armed forces, the IDF, is getting prepared for a major land offensive, air and sea on Gaza, but that in itself is going to bring on very serious consequences for both sides.
Certainly. And what are the overall diplomatic efforts for this region when you have people, that are being told to leave Gaza, but they can't get out? Egypt has essentially kept its border closed or even limited those crossings.
Well, that can turn into a humanitarian disaster. If Israel goes in full force into Gaza, there are going to be obviously many casualties. And there certainly, if a humanitarian corridor, if I can call it that, is not established, that's only going to increase the number of dead and injured. So it becomes a big humanitarian issue that will then really be the spotlight of the news, and the original Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians in the north that started all of this will be maybe put into a more minor tense. So, and also the Israelis have to think very hard that whatever military operations they commence in the immediate future, there are over 100 hostages that Hamas is holding in the Gaza Strip. And what will they do with those hostages? Will they use them as a very serious card to influence Israel's military decisions? In a worst case scenario, will they threaten to kill the hostages? So the the strategic options that Israel has to contend with now are very, very difficult.
And the latest number, at least 199 hostages at this point. Let me ask you, is there ever a diplomatic solution at all in this region with Hamas at the table?
Well, right now, it's illusory to talk about a diplomatic solution, but look, this is not the first time that there has been war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, going back to 2008, 2011, 12, now to 23. There have at least been 4 or 5 major military confrontations between Israel and Hamas. And if there's a lesson that I think the Israelis have to draw from this, is that the concept of a deterrence vis-a-vis Hamas has simply not worked. It has worked for small pauses, for limited time pauses. But at the end of the day, the recurrence of these incredibly costly military encounters is very high. And this one, the October 7th one, I believe is up there with the Yom Kippur War of 1973. What we're witnessing today is going to really affect the political landscape, not only between Israel and the Palestinians, but in the region as a whole. And I think you mentioned diplomatic efforts. The immediate diplomatic effort now is to contain this crisis so that it doesn't expand. What Israel is most concerned about, or should be most concerned about, and I know in my various encounters with military intelligence and the Israeli military in the past, has been a opening up a second front in the north of Israel with Hezbollah. Hezbollah over the last 5 years has increased its military stockpiles of rockets and other weaponry and capabilities. It is supported fully by Iran, of course. And that is a real threat, because a two-front war would be a very, very dangerous situation for Israel. I think the Israeli Defense Forces and their strategy, they think they can handle it. But let's face it, that would, if that happened, I think then the conflict could very well expand throughout the whole region.
Absolutely. We have a region on edge. President Biden has said, yes, Hamas should be eliminated entirely when it comes to talks of Israel, of course, going into that Gaza Strip. But this death toll is rising there in Gaza. And some critics are questioning if Israel's actions are now going beyond self-defense. But, you know, there's a lot of people also that argue not only should Israel be able to operate without restraint, but that anything that happens in Gaza is the responsibility of Hamas. So what role does the U.S. play in these decisions?
Well, I think we have our Secretary of State going throughout the region and speaking not only with the Israelis, but with Arab leaders, and obviously coordinating with our allies in Europe and others. It shows you that it does not serve United States national security interests that this conflict get out of control in a regional sense. That would be a very destabilizing factor, not only in the Middle East, but it will have an impact globally on economies and political alignments. So it's to be prevented, if at all possible, in a very serious way. So I think that's the first task of diplomacy. But if I may say something here, what's really important, excuse me, what's really important is that at the end of the day, there is no military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There can only be a political solution. And ever since 2014, we have not had serious peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians writ large. And you just can't let this frozen conflict smolder, because why? Because of what we're witnessing in the last week. It'll blow up in our collective faces with more serious consequences than previously. And so what after this, and this may sound like an illusion, but after we get through all of this, and hopefully it's contained and doesn't become a regional conflict, I think governments are going to have to step back, especially the Israelis and the Palestinians. And there is the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank that Israel has negotiated with. And they're going to have to step back, and they're going to have to think about how to get back to the table of negotiations, because there's only a political solution to this problem, not a military one. And that was told to me when I was ambassador to Israel by Yitzhak Rabin, a very esteemed prime minister, who lost his life because he committed himself to peace between the Arabs and the Israelis. He was assassinated for that. But he made it clear, not only to me, but publicly, that as a military man, there is only a political solution.
And I've heard you put it, the unstable stability in the area can no longer function, right? Ambassador Edward Djerejian, thank you so much for your time. I want to bring our big story now to our panel. Of course, joining us today is our ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse, ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy, our former Republican chairman of the House and Homeland Security Committee, John Katko, and Democratic strategist Alencia Johnson. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And John, as we start with you, senior U.S. official also told Martha Raddatz that the Biden administration is now getting warnings from some allies that if Israel moves aggressively and if this lasts for a long time, that they will be unable to support them publicly in the way that they have so far. So what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think this is exactly what Hamas wanted to have happen. If you really take a step back, they committed such atrocities and took all these hostages, knowing that Israel would have no choice but to go into Gaza once and for all. And their hope is that this chaos happens, that Israel oversteps somehow in Gaza, and that the world opinion turns against them. So it's going according to Hamas's plan to some extent, but I don't see Israel being able to do anything else. So I don't really have an answer for you at this point.
Right. Yeah, I understand. And Alencia, to you, that same senior U.S. official also said that a lot of people feel like the longer Israel waits to actually go in, that the more difficult and dangerous it would be for these Israeli forces, and that there's a belief right now within the White House that only President Biden could successfully urge restraint. What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that the Biden administration is weighing here, obviously wanting to support an ally in the region, but they are very concerned about the very real humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the innocent Palestinians who are also losing their lives. I think the White House is also considering what they are dealing with domestically, the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And so I paint that picture, and that the Biden administration knows that President Biden has a significant influence, but has a lot of different situations to weigh in his decision-making.
And on that note, Mick, to you, Belgian authorities have raised their nation's terror alert to its highest level in Brussels. This is today after the deadly shooting of 2 Swedes there. Also, as you know, investigators in Chicago say that a 6-year-old was stabbed to death over the weekend. They say it was because he was Muslim. It's a hate crime. So how concerned should we be about these, lone wolf, isolated attacks?
So, Kayna, we should be very concerned, because it's very difficult to determine where they're going to come from, since it's usually one individual who's been radicalized by watching what he's seeing on television. And the ground invasion hasn't even started yet. So this should be very concerning. The local governments, the federal government inside the United States and in Europe and elsewhere need to really focus on what they can do to protect their citizenship, because this is just the beginning. These depraved acts are unfortunately going to continue and may even increase.
Absolutely. Again, as the defense minister said today, there in Israel, this will be a long war. The price will be high. Mike, to you, how do you see public opinion here in the U.S. potentially shifting as the world braces for what is already threatening to be a prolonged conflict there?
The public opinion is going to be a very nuanced dynamic as we discuss what is happening in Israel and in Palestine as the humanitarian crisis heats up. It's going to be really interesting to see how does the public opinion, Kayna, really shift to Egypt, and what is Egypt's role in all of this? Because Egypt does have a strategic relationship and partnership with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but that does come with different diplomatic and policy ties, just as well as they do have a relationship with Israel when it comes to economic and security alliances and really pushing back a lot of Islam violent extremists along the peninsula. And so that dynamic is, but they still have a back channel contact with Hamas. And so how does Egypt emerge in this space? And what does the public really put the pressure on Egypt to become that moderator in this region to help soothe ties? The big concerns I've been talking to my Egyptian sources is that they're concerned displacement of the Palestinian refugees. They believe that once you start having refugees become displaced, leaving their homeland, it becomes a whole different political dynamic onto themselves about their return.
Right, and at this point, they have nowhere else to go. Mike Muse, Mick Mulroy, Alencia Johnson, and John Katko, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.